It's time to declare a state of emergency.
Everyone in North Carolina needs to panic. This is an emergency and it needs to be dealt with. Roy Cooper, the governor, the Democrat governor of North Carolina, came out yesterday and issued a state of emergency. And I saw this come across the headlines and go, oh my gosh, what is happening in North Carolina? Is there a environmental disaster? Is there a hurricane? Is there an earthquake? Is there a tornado? What's happening there? Is there some sort of, I don't know, military coup on the government? What is happening to elicit a state of emergency in which everyone should panic? Nothing, apparently. There's some legislation going through that Roy Cooper does not like regarding schools. Parents across the country, and specifically in North Carolina, would like to see the state not put such a heavy emphasis on catering to the teachers' unions and instead possibly, maybe, focus on the kids, as that is the entirety of the goal of education. However, if you're someone like Roy Cooper, someone deviating away from government schools and promoting things like school choice or charter schools, that is completely unacceptable, and that is why he has issued a state of emergency. And you may think, did he actually say state of emergency? Because that seems a little bit over the top, a little bit drastic. Yes, he did. Watch this short clip. This is taken from like a 5-minute video. This is the governor of the state declaring a state of emergency because of legislation he doesn't like.
Hi, everybody. It's time to declare a state of emergency for public education in North Carolina. There's no executive order like with a hurricane or the pandemic, but it's no less important. It's clear that the Republican legislature is aiming to choke the life out of public education. I'm declaring this state of emergency because you need to know what's happening. If you care about public schools in North Carolina, it's time to take immediate action and tell them to stop the damage that will set back our schools for a generation.
And that's it. That is the emergency that everyone in North Carolina needs to be aware of. Now, here's a couple things. Now, first of all, we can talk about the issue itself. I think it's pretty self-evident and pretty well argued that school choice is a better system, especially for lower income families. If you're not familiar with school choice, it is right now, depending on your zip code, the government sends you to government school, which in most places around the country, the government school system is failing kids and their families. Now, part of the ways that the government school system is failing is because there's no competition. If you live in that area, if you live in that zip code or school district, you are automatically sent to one school or the other. Now, what school choice seeks to do is basically say that passing, some sort of accreditation, I don't know what the accreditation process is like in North Carolina, but here in California, you have to pass an accreditation process, and then you can accept vouchers from kids to come to your school. Effectively, what you're doing is you're creating a free market for education in which parents who pay for school by their tax dollar get a voucher, and then that kid goes to this school, and therefore this school can succeed or not based on how many kids decide to go there, which competition drives everything up in terms of quality. That's the argument for school choice. It makes 100% sense. However, if you're in bed with the teachers' unions and want to promote government schools, you hate school choice, which is the situation going on in North Carolina. Roy Cooper, the Democrat governor of North Carolina, is clearly backed by the teachers' unions, which are advocates for the teachers, not for the students, which again is the only goal of education. And therefore, because legislation is going to get through, and because Republicans in the legislature of North Carolina have veto override ability, he's calling for a state of emergency to bring attention to the fact that parents and legislators want better schools for their kids. Now, he goes on to this 5-minute video talking about, here's what it's doing, and this is going to be destructive. But all of it, I would say, is a complete partisan lunacy. and he's just trying to gain attention. Now, here's the bigger problem, I think, with this. How low are we going to set the bar for states of emergency and executive power? Now, you heard in that clip right there that this is not the same. He's not going to be able to wield the same power as a hurricane or a tornado or some sort of natural disaster. Having said that, it's still using the same terminology and the same verbiage for the public. And what he's doing effectively is campaigning through the official office that he has by calling it a state of emergency. Here's the issue. When you actually have state of emergencies, one, if you actually have a state of emergency, you lessen the amount of people that pay attention, because several people, especially commenting in here, I've been able to see a couple of the comments of people who live in North Carolina just rolling their eyes. Interesting comments from people, again, who actually live in North Carolina. People who live in North Carolina rolling their eyes and not paying attention to an actual emergency. That's where I see a problem with this too. The other issue would be the FEC. Well, technically speaking, it would be North Carolina Elections Committee. The FEC is the Federal Elections Commission. Every state has one. And what it is the regulatory agency that allows certain things or disallows certain things, basically has standards and guidelines for what's campaigning and what's official government use. In every single state, in all federal elections, in all of those, you cannot, legally speaking, give a political speech or make a political claim from an official government position. You can advocate for policy and legislation and ideas, but you can't promote yourself or your name and likeness for elections down the road. Does that make sense? In effect, I would be super curious if the North Carolina Regulatory Committee that manages elections sees this as a breach in which the governor used a state of emergency to tell people about what he thinks should happen from a political standpoint. The lines get a little bit blurry with this sort of stuff, and a lot of people don't get probably the most recent example. Remember the video, the speech that Joe Biden gave at Independence Hall in Philadelphia, of where there's pictures of him with a big red background, screaming. Just the optics were terrible on that. He effectively gave an entirely political speech from a presidential podium, which is not okay, not allowed. But unfortunately, nothing happened because a lot of people play fast and loose with election laws. And a lot of times nothing ever does happen with this. Now, take it on to another situation that has been very much in the news. Elections Commission's guidelines is what President Trump is being accused of in Manhattan. We talked about this at length, and we don't need to go over it again. But effectively, the presidential campaign of Donald Trump in 2016 filed some paperwork incorrectly, and therefore is being prosecuted and led to the first arrest of a former U.S. president in this nation's history. You want to talk partisan BS? This should give you it right on a silver platter. Effectively speaking, I think the governor of North Carolina is violating all kinds of campaign laws by issuing a state of emergency for political purposes, but I don't think it'll ever get prosecuted because he is a Democrat, and because we don't prosecute Democrats for this sort of thing. We only prosecute former Republican presidents who filed some paperwork possibly incorrectly. That's still alleged, by the way. So there you go, North Carolina.